Okay, so we come up to 1976 and the album Presence. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the events that led up to Presence uh,
Oh
and
yeah.
the tragedy of the car accident in Greece, where Robert Plant was on vacation and he and his wife were in a car accident and both severely injured. Robert Plant and his wife managed to survive this accident, but Robert Plant ends up in like a mostly big body cast from his feet up to his chest.
Yeah, that really messed him up badly.
It really messed him up badly, and they're getting ready to get ready to go into the album, go into the next album, and he has to sing. They would wheel him into the room on a two wheeler, and he would sing his parts even though he was standing there in a body cast. He would sing his parts, and he did a great job on Presence. But this was a physical challenge for him, certainly. And a lot of people consider Presence sort of the Jimmy Page album in that it's like this album is the most Jimmy Page in terms of its sonics, its construction. It's not that it isn't a Led Zeppelin album, but he is certainly the driving force here. There are people who consider this almost like a Jimmy Page solo album. It's not that. It really isn't that. But like when we talk about In Through the Outdoors being a John Paul Jones album, this is kind of the Jimmy Page album.
There's a lot of guitar.
There's a lot of guitar. He's definitely at his height of his heroin addiction on Presence, and he manages to do this album at Musicland in Munich in 18 days. Uh, just barely, he manages to finish this album. The Stones had Musicland booked. He has to call Mick Jagger and says, "Look, we're running a little late. Can you give us like an extra few days before you come in here and you guys record your album?" And Mick said, "Sure, we'll give you a few days." And so Jimmy Page stays up for like 18 days nonstop making this album, and he's doing nothing but blow and heroin. And for all of that drug use, this is a really guitar heavy, guitar good album in that respect.
I love this album.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. It's the Led Zeppelin album that's like, you want when you've heard all of the classic stuff to death and you want a little bit of change up, you put on Presence and it really delivers the goods. Doug Aldrich told me that. Doug Aldrich, he's like, I've heard all the Zeppelin stuff so much. I think at this point Presence is my favorite because it's like a breath of fresh air.
You could kind of say that it's the opposite of the third album. The third album is a lot of acoustic. This is all like electric in a way, and
Right. Right. And we have some great tracks here. Really great tracks here.
oh
But I
yeah,
mean, the idea that, if you think about this, this was made under adverse conditions. They didn't know whether Robert Plant would ever be able to tour again. They didn't know whether he would ever really walk again.
yeah.
And
There was a moment where they thought he might like be like yeah, not able to walk ever
right,
again.
and I mean, it's great that he did, and it's great, but I mean, it's not that it didn't take it out of him. He was never quite the same, but him certainly he's been able to perform, obviously, but he was in rough shape. And I remember reading the story. There was a time he fell over in the studio. They were afraid he broke his hip again or whatever it was because he keeled over in this body cast, and everyone was like, "Oh shit!" And they rushed in and they propped him up again. But anyway,
And the whole story about the accident itself, they had like a basically private plane fly in from Greece
fly him
to
out, get him back to the UK where they could
yeah.
actually operate on him, and more seriously, his wife was in worse shape. Robert was just like banged up. His wife was like you know near death. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was a really stressful time for the band. And we didn't even go into the part where his son Carrick had died of blood disease earlier, and that's
Yeah,
covered in that book we've been talking about.
and Jimmy Page not showing up for the funeral.
Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones did not show up for the funeral. So Carrick Plant, who you see in the footage of The Song Remains the Same, this little boy who had Robert's blonde locks. He had the same exact hair as his father. Obviously the apple of his father's eye. They're out on tour, and this kid does somehow contracts this rare blood disease and dies, and they cancel the tour.
He was 5 years old, right?
Yeah, something like that. Just a little boy. And they cancel the tour and they all go back. And Robert Plant holds the funeral, and John Bonham shows up, but nobody else from Zeppelin does. And after that, that's when the power in the band shifted. In Jimmy Page, the definitive biography, the guy talks about this as being like one of the moments where the power shifted in the band. Because from that point on, don't forget, Jimmy Page is on heroin at this point. He doesn't give, junkies don't give a hell about too many other things. So when Plant's kid dies and Jimmy Page doesn't show up at the funeral and John Paul Jones doesn't show up at the funeral, and I don't think Peter Grant showed up either, I think Robert Plant was like, fuck these guys. I'm the singer in this band. I can leave anytime I want. And without wishing his kid to have died, the power shifted. This had always been Jimmy's band. And now it's now Robert Plant saying, you know what? I'm not that invested. You guys didn't show up for me. You didn't show up for my family, my kid. What if I walk? And they knew that at that point, by 75, you're not replacing Robert Plant and Zeppelin. He's a bona fide rock god at the top of the mountain at that point. There's no replacing him at that point.
That was between physical graffiti and presence.
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of big things in their personal life going on between these two albums.
Yeah, and this is where the wheels start coming off the bus, frankly, between the drug use and the interpersonal of these kinds of things, and the fact that you're having all of these stressful things happen. All of a sudden, your singer is in jeopardy. Your guitar player goes into the studio and really pretty much finishes this album on his own. And it's amazing that the album turned out as well as it did, given the fact that Jimmy was all strung out on heroin.
Yeah, the description of his state of being during that recording was insane. It's pretty amazing that his heart didn't explode during the during the mixing and mastering of this album.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to how much he still was into the music and into, being in this creative mindset within this band, that this album turned out as well as it did, and that he played as well as he did on it. He was still playing very well. Not, we know that when he went out on tour for this album in 77, he was really shaky at times and he was having health problems because of the drug use at this time. But the album stands up. And we start off with Achilles' Last Stand, all 10 and a half minutes of it. And this is an epic track.
It is.
It's absolutely epic, and this is Jimmy's guitar army at its best, and this is this ridiculously good epic track. And a lot of people point to this as sort of like Zeppelin as proto metal. It's a little progressive, it's a little metal, it's got a lot of drama in it. The drums are ridiculous in this thing. And it's one of his very best guitar solos. We talked a little about this earlier, where like John Paul Jones had said, I don't know what you're going to do over this progression. And Jimmy said, no, trust me, I got this. I know what I'm going to do. And he ripped out one of his very best lengthy guitar solos over this thing that is just a melodic masterpiece.
Oh yeah, yeah. He got 6 guitar tracks overdubbed.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guitar album, a really guitar heavy album with lots of guitar tracks doing lots of heavy lifting throughout the entire album.
And also the drums are great, vocals are great, like, everything's great.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part is that the vocals are as good as they are, given that Robert Plant cut most of this stuff in a full body cast. You know, you try to imagine that, and yeah, it really did come out good. And then you move on to For Your Life, which is a really heavy sleazy track. It's not so much the big epic, but it's like this really nasty grimy lick that works so well, and it's got a bluesy sort of flavor to it and everything. Again, a lot of this is Robert Plant, but the guitar parts on this are just terrific.
Yeah, I love that song.
We played a little of this in our tone section when we talked about Jimmy Page's epic tone on Celebration Day. They hadn't really played this song live till Celebration Day, and then he busts out the black Les Paul custom with the Bigsby on it, and the sound is just immense. And you get that. I mean, we played the track already, but it's just like it was so cool to hear it live finally, because they didn't play. This was not one they played live, and it's just you know really nasty, really sexual, and really big.
He used a 1962 Fender Stratocaster in the recording of the album version. It's about a friend of Robert Plant who got into drugs. Wonder who the friend was.
Could have been anybody in those days.
And then we get Royal Orleans.
Yeah, they were spending a lot of time in New Orleans at that time, and Jimmy and Robert really loved hanging out in New Orleans, and it was influential on them as writers and stuff like that. It's a good song. It's got this sort of stop start rhythm thing that Jimmy was known for. Da 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 da. Nice riff. It's quick. It's a quick song. It's a 3-minute song, but it's kind of like an album track rather than a single.
Yeah. The song is about a guy who picks up a drag queen and discovers the next morning that the person is a guy.
Right. And that was John Paul Jones.
When they liked to hang out at gay bars in New Orleans because they were more fun and they didn't get hassled for autographs.
There was also a story that John Paul Jones was hanging out with some drag queen and he didn't know it was a drag queen. Not that he was not. I'm not suggesting he was cheating on his wife or anything like that, because I think he did remain true to his family, but like he was like hanging out with what he thought was a chick. So maybe that was part of the impetus for that song. I don't know.
And then we get Nobody's Fault But Mine, which is one of my
Great,
favorite
great,
tracks of that
great,
album.
great, great Zeppelin track.
Da
Yeah,
da 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 da
yeah.
da 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 da.
This is Jimmy and Robert playing off each other, singing the riff together, singing and playing the riff together. Um, Everything about this track is wonderful.
When the drums also come in,
Yeah,
it's yeah.
this is a great track from Zeppelin.
It was funny. I was listening to this at work, and one of my colleagues was saying, like, "Hey, is this Guns N' Roses or something?" I was like, no, man, that's Led Zeppelin. These are the original guys.
GNR before GNR. Yeah,
Yeah, it's one of those songs I keep coming back to.
yeah, yeah. It is a really good one.
Sound, and they did it on the Celebration Day album too, and it really sounds great there too.
Right, and they would play. This was one of the ones they would play live every now and then. And they did play it, like you said, Celebration Day, but this was one that did make the live set every now and then. So not as big a deal. So Candy Store Rock, you get sort of like this bizarre slide riff with Jimmy and Robert doing sort of like an Elvis vocal kind of thing. And to me, this is filler. It's not a bad song, but it's not like one of the better tracks on the album. It's kind of like the filler track.
Robert Plant really likes this. He considered it one of his favorites, it says. Right, then we get Hot On For Nowhere. Gotta listen to that too for a sec.
Nice. It's got a great beat.
It's funny, I just need to hear 1 second and I'm like, oh yeah, it's that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. But I mean, there's something to this where we have to listen to the track to remind us which one it is.
Yeah.
as opposed to the ones that we know by heart. So there's something to that, and it's like ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum, ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum, bum 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 ba-dum bum bum ba-da-bum. This is sort of like a funky rhythm thing. It's great from that perspective, and this is a good song. I like this song too. It's really cool.
Timeless.
It is, but again, it's not what I would call a standout track on this album. As good as it is, it's not For Your Life. It's not Achilles' Last Stand. It's not Nobody's Fault.
Right. Well, Plant said that lyrics reflected not only his physical trapped situation at the time, but his general frustrations with Jimmy Page and Peter Grant, whom Plant was convinced were insensitive to his point of view. Hence the line, I got friends who would give me fuck all.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to that thing where it's like Peter Grant and Jimmy Page are so much into heroin at this point that they don't really, or they're not really attuned to the fact that their singer is looking for camaraderie from them and is not getting it. This is where the drugs are tearing this band apart. And whether you hear it in the actual recorded output or whether you hear it in the lyric, it's a different story. But like, this is Robert Plant saying, I am now an employee. I'm doing my job. I'm doing it well. But these people who I was hoping I could rely on as brothers are too out of it to be supportive for me, whether it's my kid dying or anything else.
The love is gone, so to speak.
Right. And then the last song on this album is super underrated.
I love that track.
T for One is a humongously slow blues number, 9.5 minutes long almost. And it's really, they take this slow, laborious time to do a blues number, and it's super heavy. And it's the best blues they've done since I've been loving you. It's not since I've
I
been
agree
loving
with
you,
that.
but
Yeah.
it's to me it's better in some respects than the ones they did on the first album. It's better than I Can't Quit You Baby. It's better than You Shook Me. This is Jimmy and Robert again going back to their blues roots and just really milking the hell out of a really slow blues, and they do it really well.
Yeah, it's I guess the classic Led Zeppelin blues song to close out the album. And we also need to talk about the cover. We didn't talk about the cover yet.
Yeah, so this is another Hypnosis cover. We talked a little bit about Hypnosis before. Hypnosis did the Houses the Holy album cover. I don't think they did the Physical Graffiti cover, but they did do this one. And you have the object, the big black obelisk thing in the middle of the table and stuff. And this is sort of a one of those classic abstract things that Hypnosis came up with for the album. We talked about Hypnosis in the Black Sabbath Tony Iommi podcast because
Yeah,
they
be
did a
sure to check that one out
yeah,
if you haven't
yeah,
already.
yeah. But Hypnosis were doing a lot of album covers for a lot of acts at those times. Hypnosis is responsible for Dark Side of the Moon and um, House of the Holy and almost all of the UFO covers that are interesting, and I think a few of the Yes albums too. So they were a art collective that would do album covers on commission from the bands, and this is what they came up with for Presence. This black obelisk kind of thing that becomes the central focal point in a bunch of photographs on the Presence cover.
And no one really, it's never explained what it is, right?
It's called The Object.
Yeah. It's this happy family sitting around this black thing.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like a big obelisk, basically.
They ever talk about what it might mean, or?
No, I think they just let Hypnosis come up with this thing, and they just said, okay.
Hmm.